and welcome back. My name is V, and today I would like to talk about Dawntrail's favorite girl. Now, I've only just finished Dawntrail's main story in the 7.1 a couple of weeks ago, and I didn't want to record this video immediately. I really wanted to give it a chance and to think about what I'm going to say at least a little bit before I sit in front of a camera and give my honest thoughts on Wuk Lamat. Now, there is quite a lot to talk about when it comes to Wuk Lamat, but I'm going to just try to keep it as objective as I can while actually giving you my thoughts on her character development and what made her special or not so special when it comes to Dawntrail. If you're here on the channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe, do leave the video a like for some good luck, and before we even begin, let me know in the comments what you thought of Wuk Lamat when you played through Dawntrail. Now, before we begin, I do have a little disclaimer to make, and this is regarding Wuk Lamat's voice acting. I have no beef whatsoever with Wuk Lamat's voice actors, and I don't want to make this video and make it sound like there was something wrong with how Wuk Lamat was voiced. This is not the topic of the video at all, and I am ignoring these controversies completely because at the end of the day, I didn't really mind Wuk Lamat's voice acting at all. The lines and the way they were written is a different story, but when it comes to Wuk Lamat and her voice, it's completely fine. I don't get into controversies of any kind, and if you're the kind of person who would like to jump into these discussions, I'd like to keep them away from my own comment section because I don't think that they belong there. I don't think that voice actors should be judged, bullied, attacked, or in any way targeted because of the roles they took, even if they don't do a good job with them. I think that Wuk Lamat's voice acting was in general very well done, but I don't think it fits her character. But then again, that's a whole nother story, and I don't think that it touches on Wuk Lamat's voice actor at all. However, what I would like to talk about today is Wuk Lamat's character progression through the story, how I saw it, how I felt it, and why I think Wuk Lamat had a great impact on how people received Dawntrail's story in general. I'm gonna tell you about how I saw Wuk Lamat when I started playing Dawntrail. And this started way before the Dawntrail actual release. This was in the last patch of Endwalker, where we had the opportunity to meet Wuk Lamat and to kind of get our first impression on who she is. Of course, we had no idea just how important she was going to be, but I think at that point no one could have imagined that we were essentially going to be stuck with Wuk Lamat for the rest of Dawntrail. When we met her, I immediately kind of disliked her. I thought that she was a little bit childish, a little ignorant, I guess, and I didn't like the concept of us having to babysit her in any way. But I also didn't mind her too much because I felt like we didn't really have that many connections with her at all. We just met her in the pre-patch, and I was very, very surprised when I started playing Dawntrail to realize that she is basically the center of our world. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why she was suddenly so important to us that we essentially chose to make her our best friend and hang out with her and not with the people who we went through so many adventures with. Of course, Eorzea, Alphino, and everyone else were still present in the story, but I felt like their characters were largely cheapened, especially with those cooking quests and a lot of the stuff that I can't even remember because I felt like it didn't really matter at all. So I didn't like how I felt like we essentially ditched our old team to join this new team, this new environment, and essentially vote for Wuk Lamat, even though I really wanted to have a choice in this. As a player, I feel like Final Fantasy XIV never really gives us a choice. And I think that there are ways to write a story and have the story have the same outcome and still give the players some sort of agency, some sort of choice, and some sort of way to feel like they're actually a part of the story. What I didn't like is how our main character suddenly felt like some sort of a sidekick, and how we were going around essentially babysitting her. And I felt like it was so painfully obvious that even the story writers and the developers themselves put that into the game. Because if you remember some of the early game MSQ in Dawntrail, for the most part, our character was smiling very nervously at pretty much every single childish thing that Wuk Lamat would do. And it made me wonder, why do we not have a choice in this? Why do we have to be on her side? And the only answer that I could think of is because we met her first. So she literally spawned in Thavnair, I believe, and we met her, and therefore there was this huge political thing, and we were absolutely on her side. We were forced into believing in her ideals and doing the things that she wanted us to do just because we met her first. And I'm not saying that I would have voted for Kona or for anyone else who was a part of this big race, but I wanted to feel like I at least had a choice and like I didn't favor my friend, who essentially wasn't even a friend in comparison to our team from long ago. She felt more like an acquaintance. So for the most part of the early MSQ, apart from the occasional, breathers and comical moments with Alpaca or a trial, one trial, by the way, that we had in the early Dawntrail MSQ, I felt like I was on babysitting duty pretty much the whole time, and honestly, it didn't really make me feel all that good. I just felt like the focus was on her and we didn't care enough. I don't think that the story should have been written this way, but I would have been much happier if, for example, someone from our own team, someone from our group of friends who we already know, like Kryl or anyone else, was suddenly the main character, because there's already an emotional connection. I'm a creature of habit, and for me it was very difficult to be thrown into a new zone, new story, new environment, and on top of that have someone completely new be the epicenter of attention. And when we found out that Kryl was going to be very, very important for the story, I was suddenly hoping that she would be the one who we, in a way, follow and whose story we're a part of. Essentially, her story was advertised as this massive development in Dawntrail, whereas all we got is a little bit of her backstory and a few cutscenes, one of which was quite emotional, but it's so late in the Dawntrail MSQ that I felt like it was to the developers and to people who wrote the dialogue and the game that it was as important as those early cutscenes in the Wild Wild West zone. It didn't feel like it had an impact on the story at all. Now, I'm not going to be all negative, and I am going to say that there was a pivotal moment where I felt like Wuk Lamat went through quite a bit of change. And I think that this is a classic JRPG story trope that I didn't particularly mind. But it was the moment when Wuk Lamat was experiencing trauma and fear for the first time, when Tulilal was attacked, when her father was murdered, and when all these things started happening. And I have to admit, I was really moved by that. I even made some videos and reactions to these cutscenes, and I thought that they are actually changing Wuk Lamat. Predictable as it is, trauma and these horrific events in our lives do change us, and sometimes, as awful as it is, they do change us for the better. And I felt like that's where they were going with Wuk Lamat's story, and I was quite ready to vibe with it. So I saw that as a great opportunity to do something else with Wuk Lamat's character, maybe even make her a little darker, a little bit more interesting. But I felt like even after that, they failed at doing so, because Wuk Lamat, even though she stopped being this absolute centerpiece of everything from somewhere around level 95 or 96 MSQ up until the very end, she was still there, and it felt like she went through this traumatic event, but then 5 minutes later she was like, oh well, I have a funeral to take care of and we're moving on with our lives. And I didn't feel like the events that should have had a long-lasting effect on her really had an effect. I felt like her character fell off and that there was a big missed opportunity to make something memorable out of her. Hell, I would even prefer seeing her become a villain and be completely traumatized by everything that's happened than just be someone who in the next MSQ section is organizing this funeral, then going away, going into this dome to figure out something new. She didn't have a single moment of grief or reflection or thinking about her father or her family and stopping to reflect on some of these events. I didn't feel like she was mentally going back to what was happening. Obviously, she was trying to protect Tuliolal after it was attacked because she learned from their mistakes, but that was about it. I didn't feel like Kona and Wuk Lamat had any sort of moment of bonding, even trauma bonding at that point, where they, even after a while, grieved together. This feels like an expansion that focuses a lot on grief and on loss, yet we didn't feel almost any lasting impact on Kona or Wuk Lamat, and we never saw them openly discuss what they're feeling and how they're processing grief, because I feel like they were all too busy and too distracted with their own goals that they didn't stop to process their feelings, which first of all I feel is unhealthy, and second of all, for us as players, it made the death itself forgettable, because the supposedly main character of the story and of this part of the MSQ, which was Wuk Lamat, in my opinion, didn't really care about it. And if she didn't care about it all that much, why should we as players care about it? Now, she did have a few feeble attempts of her character development, especially when she was fighting Sphene, and even though I typically as a player don't feel like I enjoy these moments where I'm robbed of my own victory, we did finish the trial, and she again was the hero of the story and had another opportunity for a little bit of character growth, and I feel like it failed there as well. Mostly because I can't remember a single moment in the late MSQ where I felt like she was different, like she was more likable. She had a new determination and obviously new resolve, since she did become the head of resolve or whatever you want to call it, but it wasn't what I expected her to be. So let's say that the only real choice for their little competition to end was to make Kona the head of reason and to make Wuk Lamat the head of resolve. I felt like I don't know almost anything about the head of reason, and we agreed to this only to find out in the very, very late MSQ of Dawntrail who Kona actually is, where he comes from, what his backstory is. And obviously he learned a lot from his mistakes, and he realized that there needs to be a balance between technological innovations and respecting the cultures and traditions of their own people. but then again, I still feel like he was overshadowed. We have no idea what was happening in Tuliyollal while we were in the dome, and anything could have happened. Wuk Lamat, along with us and everyone else, just left for the dome. These ominous airships were still there, and even though we had limited communication with Kona, I feel like we had no insight whatsoever into the state of the city that we left to its own devices. How did Kona protect the city? What exactly did they do to stop the attacks? Nobody knows. We didn't discuss that, and we just kind of knew that they were safe because Kona had some sort of communication with Y'shtola. Y'shtola reassured us that everything's okay, and we operated on that knowledge, which to me was a bit ridiculous. I feel like ultimately the dev team knew that going with Wuk Lamat's story was a big risk, and they still went with it. I don't know what was going through their heads when they wrote her, and I wish someone from the dev team actually came and played the game from the beginning till the very end, the Dawntrail section at least, and thought very long and hard about Wuk Lamat's character development, and thought to themselves, does she have anything memorable that the players will walk away with and think, wow, okay, I really enjoyed this character, even though the beginning was a little bit slow. This character managed to do this and that, or this character became this and that, and had this important thing going on with them that was just so special that I can walk away thinking, okay, Dawntrail is a really, really good start of the next story. I've been sitting here for about 2 weeks, and I can't think of a single cutscene or a single thing about Wuk Lamat's behavior or attitude or character development that makes me feel like Dawntrail, because of Wuk Lamat, is actually amazing. And what's actually ridiculous to me is that the Wuk Lamat itself overshadowed the fact that we now have female Hrothgars. And you can tell how unliked Wuk Lamat actually is by the fact that there's hardly any female Hrothgars. And I think that if you have a lovable characters, you naturally have a lot more people wanting to look like that character. Not necessarily impersonate them in game or create some sort of a role play persona of them, but just use their race, think of some glamour pieces that would fit them and their culture and resemble them as closely as possible. I am not noticing that across FF14 at all, and maybe some people do enjoy female Hrothgars for their own reasons. I feel like Wuk Lamat herself largely managed to destroy that experience for so many, and that really makes me sad. The most hurtful thing for me about Wuk Lamat is knowing that the FF14 writing and dev team, they know how to create these memorable moments regarding any characters. They know how to write these strong lines that resonate with you, that people will cut and clip into cutscenes and put on YouTube, that every time you see them, you burst into tears. For example, look at how Grahatia was written and how he started in the Crystal Palace and how he went through Shadowbringers and became this person with so many lines that just absolutely shredded us. And I'm not saying that every character has to have these deeply traumatic lines, but they all carry a certain amount of wisdom. And they even did Grahatia justice in Dawntrail. There was that gondola ride where he had some really, really powerful words for us, and I felt like the writing itself continued in a very good way. It's just that the new character that they introduced didn't really have a lot of powerful things to say at all. Now, I am going to say something that I never thought I would say on a video, but I think that the FF14 dev team is chronically scared of failure. And I would like to see them redeem themselves in that sort of fashion. I don't want a fearful jump into a new story and throwing something on the wall and hoping that it would stick. I somehow want this fixed, and I would like to see the patches work towards Wuk Lamat becoming a redeemable character and giving her something to remember her for. I feel like as FF14 players, we are very good at accepting redemption arcs and even being apologists in a way when it comes to slow or poor writing of certain characters, for as long as it pays off in the end. So I am choosing to be patient with Wuk Lamat and with her story, but I think that the worst thing ultimately that they can do is completely abandon the story because of the bad player reception and jump into something new. As much as I, as a Final Fantasy IV fan, enjoyed the Endwalker post patches, I wouldn't like to see the Endwalker patches. I wouldn't like to see Dawntrail post patches be written in a completely different way and diverge from the story, because then if we are done with Wuk Lamat, this is all that we have left. This is all of our memories of this girl, now this woman, and we can't really say that there was anything that redeemed her. So I'm choosing, again, like I said, to be patient and to trust that there will be something that will, in a way, apologize for her development during the MSQ and fix it in a graceful way, rather than us just going off to a new zone and doing a new thing and just completely abandoning this project and the story because of poor character development. And I know that ultimately the way people receive characters is going to reflect on the playtime, on how people feel about the game, and that ultimately reflects on the most important thing to companies at the end of the day. Square Enix is a company, and what's important is to make profit and to keep the sponsors happy as well. If Wuk Lamat is this doom bringer in Dawntrail, I do worry that they're just going to diverge from the story and never give us as players a satisfying conclusion on our story, unless the story's already been written, and in that case we can only hope that it's just going to end up being okay and that we're going to have to trust the dev team to pull that off. This is a bit of a long-winded video, and I don't really know what made me think about it or talk about it, but I feel like at this point everyone and their dog has discussed Wuk Lamat, and I wanted to finish Dawntrail at least 7.0 and sit down and think about it. But I was a little disappointed after 7.0, especially with how the game ended so abruptly, and I wanted to give her another chance in 7.1, and I wasn't necessarily disappointed by 7.1, but I feel like nothing big has changed in that sense, and I am starting to really worry and wonder where the story of FF14 will go if Wuk Lamat, the way she is, continues to be the centerpiece of the story and we never receive a satisfying conclusion to who she really is, what she really wants. Is she forever going to stay this girl who briefly processes events in her own life and then just stuffs them under the carpet and just goes on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing? I of course understand that this is a trauma response and that she had to act bravely and save her people and had other things to essentially focus on when she was basically a leader of a town that was being attacked. But it's time to slow down and it's time to process all these events and it's time to grow from them and learn from them. And I feel like Wuk Lamat has not reached that stage of the story at all, and that's just something that I would like to see. How do you feel about Wuk Lamat, and what are your thoughts on some of the things that I covered in the video? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, turn the notification bell on, leave the video a like for some good luck, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching, take care, and bye bye.